Cracking the Coding Interview, one of the best and most popular resources for preparing for coding interviews. I'm sure most of you have heard of this book, and a lot of you have probably even cracked it open. Get it cracked and cracking. So most of the time when you read a book, you're going to start with page 1 and read it sequentially. This one's a little bit different in that you're going to be jumping around a lot. There's a lot of fluff in here, and I mean, look at this thing. This is a thick boy. So it can be a little bit overwhelming when you first pick this up, but honestly, most of this book is just solutions. So if you see right here, this entire part of the book is all solutions, which again, it seems like a lot, but with code, there's a lot of spacing. So a little bit of code takes up a lot of space, especially considering the fact that this book the solutions are written in Java, which in itself takes up a lot of space. Speaking of which, all editions of this book are written in Java, but even if you know a language that's syntactically similar to Java, like Python or C++, you should be able to follow along and understand all the solutions. If that's something that doesn't interest you, you should definitely check out the book Elements of Programming Interviews, as they have versions in Python as well as C++. So for this video, I'm going to pull up a PDF version of the book. That way it's a little bit easier for you guys to follow along. And we're just going to go through mostly the table of contents, and I'm going to show you guys which parts I like and which parts you're probably good to skip. The first chapter is an introduction to the interview process. It's only a few pages long, and it just kind of explains why coding interviews are the way they are. Chapter 2, Behind the Scenes. This talks about what the interview process is like at different companies. Now, this book is like 7 years old, so the interview process from what it was like in 2015 is probably going to be fairly different than what it is now. So this is a pretty short chapter, but just know that the interviews now might be a little bit different. Chapter 3, Special Situations. You can go ahead and skip this. This is more for like testers or dev leads or product managers. Chapter 4, Before the Interview, Getting the Right Experience, Writing a Great Resume. If you want to get into like the technical stuff, then you obviously don't care about this. I do really like this preparation map. So it gives you an idea of how to tackle the interview process. Anything from, over a year before the interview starts, 3 to 6 months before, what to do, 4 weeks before, all the way down to the day before and the day of, and even after. Chapter 5, this is all about behavioral questions. And if you want to just get to the technical stuff, you can go ahead and skip this. But for me, one of my weaknesses is behavioral questions. So I try to get as much prep on this as I can. Okay, chapter 6, Big O. This is definitely a chapter you want to look at, whether you're new to Big O or you just want a refresher. There's a lot of good stuff here about time and space complexity. And then you definitely want to look over the examples and exercises. I actually have a video on Big O notation, and a lot of the examples that I took are specifically from this book. Chapter 7 is about technical questions, just different types of techniques that you can use to approach a problem. I really like this section here on the best conceivable runtime. It really helps you in trying to find an optimal solution for a problem. So say you're given the problem, find the largest number in an array. Well, you know that you're going to have to look at every single number. So an optimal solution to that isn't going to be anything better than a linear solution. Chapter 8, The Offer and Beyond. Well, you can worry about that when you get to that point. All right, here we go. Interview questions. This is the meat of the book. It's split into 2 parts, data structures and then algorithms. For data structures, it's going to be arrays and strings. If you go through an interview process with a company, you're at some point going to be given a problem revolving around arrays and strings or something that uses them. And how each chapter works is they spend a few pages kind of talking about different things like array lists or string builders, and then they go to the actual interview problems. Each chapter will have about 10 to 15 problems. Chapter 2 is linked lists, which is my favorite data structure. Again, a few pages on creating a linked list, deleting a node from a singly linked list, and then the list of problems. Chapter 3 is on stacks and queues. So I hardly ever use stacks and queues in everyday programming, but it seems that they appear very often in coding interviews. Like the proportion on how much they get asked in coding interviews and how much you actually use them is not proportional at all. So this is a chapter that you definitely want to go over, because the fact that you probably haven't had a lot of exposure to them in your everyday programming and how much they get asked, it's definitely something you want to brush up on. And then the last chapter for data structures is trees and graphs. Again, trees are not something that I use very often, but interviewers, for some reason, love to ask tree problems. For this chapter, I highly recommend that you already know all your basic tree traversal algorithms like pre-order, post-order, and in-order. You should know these like the back of your hand, as well as the different search functions like depth-first search and breadth-first search, as well as inserting and deleting nodes into a tree. Before we move on, It is recommended that you attempt the problem first, see how far you get, and then go back and look at the solution. That's definitely a good approach, but for me, especially when I was starting out, I had no idea how to approach these problems. So most of the time I would just go straight to the solution to see if I even understand what they're doing. I would just go straight to the solution. I'll go, lie on the couch or something and just see if I could understand what was going on. And that helped me out a lot when I was starting. The next section is concepts and algorithms. Chapter 5 is bit manipulation. I've never been asked a bit manipulation problem in an interview, so you're probably good to skip this part. Actually, I would say maybe go over 1 or 2 problems just so you're familiar with how bit manipulation works in the language that you're using. But other than that, don't spend too much time on this chapter. Chapter 6, math and logic puzzles. I've done a few problems in this chapter, but I haven't really been asked anything similar in a real interview. Chapter 7, object-oriented design. A lot of times this topic is specific for the role that you're going for. Or say it's for a job in Java, which is an object-oriented language. Or say you're doing like a game developer interview. This is something that you might see in one of their on-site interviews. So if that's something that you're going for, this is definitely a good chapter to look into. Chapter 8, recursion and dynamic programming. This is definitely a chapter you want to look into, especially dynamic programming, because although it doesn't get asked a whole lot, if it's something that you've never seen before, it's something that you can definitely struggle with. And then recursion, again, not something that I used. I can only think of a handful of times I've ever used recursion in an actual real world setting, but it's something that gets asked a lot. So you want to make sure you're very comfortable with recursion, things like base cases and helper functions. Chapter 9, system design and scalability. This is one of my favorite chapters in the book. It's just kind of a nice breath of fresh air from all the algorithm problems, which can be a little dry. And it's just a much more practical chapter. You're rarely going to be flipping bits in a number, but designing a system and figuring out all the major components, seeing how you can scale, it's just much more realistic to what you're going to be doing in the real world. I really like this section. There is no perfect system. This is why this is such a good interview question, because a lot of times you're going to be going back and forth with your interviewer, talking about different trade-offs and why you made certain design decisions. Chapter 10 is sorting and searching. I haven't read this chapter, so I can't speak too much about it, but you should definitely know the basic sorting algorithms like bubble sort, insertion sort, as well as the more advanced ones like quick sort and merge sort. For searching algorithms, it's really just about knowing binary search and also different flavors of it, like binary search in a rotated array, binary search in a peak array. Chapter 11, testing. Unless you're going for a testing position, you're good to skip this one. The next section is knowledge-based. Again, if it's not specific to you, you probably don't need to read it. Chapter 14, databases. Again, not a chapter that I've looked into because I haven't had a database-specific interview before. Chapter 15, threads and locks. These are more operating system-specific questions. So like deadlocks and deadlock prevention, synchronization and locks. These are operating system concepts. So for databases and threads and locks, if I were prepping for these types of interviews, I would probably not choose cracking the coding interview. Cracking the coding interview is more known for data structures and algorithms problems. So I'm not sure how good these sections are. Chapter 10 is just solutions. Chapter 11 is advanced topics. These are kind of more niche or niche topics. Things like Robin Karp substring search, red black trees. These are things that are going to be very rare unless you're going for like a specific role. You're probably not going to be asked problems like this. And then finally, we just have the code library and some hints. So for these later chapters, I would say unless you've gone back and completely mastered the first few chapters that we looked at, don't spend a whole lot of time on these chapters. Make sure you master the basic stuff before you move on. Now, is this the only resource you should use for interview prep? Probably not. But this is a great first resource or a complement to all the numerous other options there are out there. And to be honest, the problem with a book is that it's really hard to cross-reference your solutions. You have to write your code and then you have to go to the actual solution and you kind of have to like cross-reference it with what's in the book. I much prefer online resources where they have a text editor, you can write your code, and then you just hit submit and it checks it against a bunch of test cases. And also this book was written like 7 years ago, so there weren't a ton of resources out there like there are today. And I would say, 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of problems in interviews were taken directly from this book. But since this book is so popular now and people have memorize a lot of the problems, not a lot of interview questions are taken from the book. But in general, interview questions they're only really a few select styles of interview problems. Then everything else is kind of a flavor of that problem. So yeah, I do recommend this book, but again, there are a lot of other resources out there. Speaking of which, I haven't announced it yet, but I do have my own coding interview resource coming out soon. And there's a link to that down in the description if you guys want to check it out. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Keep on coding.